With this lecture, we are moving from the cellular level of organization and the chemical level of organization where we have been working previously, and now we are going to move to our next level, which is the tissue level of organization. We are going to focus on epithelial tissues for this lecture. There are 4 types of tissues. Before we begin to discuss the types of tissues, though, we probably should take time to make sure we know what a tissue is. It is a collection of specialized cells that are organized into layers, as well as the cell products from those cells that perform a specific function. So amongst the 4 types of tissues, we have the epithelial tissues. These are coverings and linings for all of the exposed surfaces internally and externally in the body. The second type of tissue is a connective tissue. Interestingly, this is not only tissues that are connecting structures to one another, but also it is tissues that are filling internal spaces, and some of those that fill internal spaces also store energy reserves. It does provide structural support for other tissues, as one would think, but also, surprisingly, fluid connective tissues transport materials throughout the body. The third type of tissue is muscle tissue. This is specialized to contract so that you have movement. Now, this does not only mean movement from one location to another, as we think of when we're walking from one place to another, or moving your arm from the table to your mouth when you're eating, things like that. But this also includes internal movement, like the heart beating and the digestive tract with its peristalsis pushing food through the entire tube. The fourth type of tissue is neural tissue. This is carrying electrical information from one part of the body to another, informing the brain and the spinal cord of what's happening on the exterior of the body as well as the interior of the body, and then the brain directing the activities of the body internally and externally as well. The epithelial tissues have a number of specialized or generalized characteristics. You will find this to be true in all epithelial tissues. The first of these general characteristics is cellularity. An epithelial tissue consists of cells that are tightly packed together, and they are tightly bonded to each other through intercellular junctions. The second characteristic is polarity. Now, this is called polarity because the 2 surfaces that we are going to look at of the cell are totally different. You have an apical surface, which is the outermost layer. It's the exposed one. When you're looking at your skin, you are seeing the apical layer. The second layer is the innermost, which is bonded to underlying tissues, and it is called the basal layer. All epithelial tissues are attached at the base of the tissue to underlying non-cellular tissues at the basement membrane or basal lamina. It is a complex structure that has protein fibers extending from the basal lamina into the epithelial tissue to tightly lock the tissues together. Epithelial tissues are avascular, meaning they do not have a blood supply of any kind. They have to get their nutrient and waste exchange by diffusion from the other tissues that are nearby. Epithelial tissues regenerate fairly rapidly compared to other types of tissues. Because of the exposed surface, these tissues are being sloughed off or damaged on a regular basis, and so we have to have a way of replenishing that supply of cells. So what good is an epithelial tissue? Number one, it provides physical protection. Think about your skin. How many times has it been cut or scraped? But yet the underlying tissues are never exposed to the exterior of the body. Controls permeability. Again, think about your skin. You go to take a shower. Does all that water get absorbed like a sponge? Fortunately, no. Epithelial tissues contain channels that are specialized for moving substances from one side of the cell to the other. They provide sensation. They are very close to numerous sensory receptors that will sense heat, cold, pain, touch, those kind of things. They produce specialized secretions. This would be the group of epithelial cells that we refer to as the glands. Epithelial tissues are very logically named. The first consideration is how many layers are on this tissue. If it is a single layer of cells, such as we're seeing here in the simple squamous epithelium, we call them simple. If, however, they are stratified, then it is indicative of a multiple layer of cells. The second consideration is cell shape. These very thin, flat cells are called squamous cells. Notice here in the stratified layer, it's still called stratified squamous epithelium, but these innermost cells appear to be more cuboidal. So it is the cells at the surface that lend the name to the tissue. Secondly, we have cuboidal cells. They are squarish. Typically, you're not going to find a nice, neat, square cell with 90-degree corners like is depicted in this picture. The third type is a columnar cell, which is taller than it is wide. We have two special cases. One is the transitional epithelium, which has the ability to stretch to accommodate a filling organ such as the bladder, and another which is called a pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Pseudo means false, so this appears to be stratified, but in reality every single cell is attached to the basal lamina. In the glandular epithelium, we have three modes of secretion. The first one is called merocrine. A merocrine secretion is where the product to be secreted is released from the cell by exocytosis. The second type is apocrine secretion. In this type of gland, we are losing a portion of the cell along with the secretion. The third type is the holocrine secretion, where the entire cell bursts, resulting in cell death of that glandular cell. So the cell itself is totally shed along with its secretion. Let's look a little bit at glandular structure. Some of our glands are unicellular, a single cell. Mucus cells would be one of those types of cells. They are called goblet cells and probably the only unicellular gland in the body. The second type and more common are the multicellular glands. This would include glands such as the sweat gland and the sebaceous gland. All of these glands that are associated with epithelial tissues are what we would call exocrine because they have an opening onto the surface of the epithelial tissue. Now, of the multicellular glands, we can group them into two types. The first one being simple, where there is a single duct that is draining that gland. Second group would be the compound, where you have a bunch of branching ducts that are draining out onto the surface. Then we can go a step further to describe our glands by calling them tubular if they make a simple straight or coiled tube, alveolar or acinar when we have a blind pocket such as this simple branched alveolar over here. The blind pocket then drains into the duct. Combine those two and you get a tubulo-alveolar, such as this compound type gland down here. Another means for describing glands would be to describe them as branched. This is where the duct branches to serve more than one tube.